Hello and welcome to the Smarter Food Supply Chain webinar series. I'm Mike Allen and I serve AIM as their Member Engagement Manager. AIM North America is an alliance enabling the cooperation, development, and standardization of AIDC technologies. From barcodes to RFID to IoT, AIM North America is your advocate. Any organization with an interest in data collection is a beneficiary of these efforts. Membership provides an opportunity to influence the direction of the industry, develop policies and standards, access market reports, and engage new partners. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to go over. On this slide, you see our Antitrust Policy. It's the policy of AIM North America to conduct its operations in strict compliance with the antitrust laws. No AIM activity shall create even the appearance of a violation of the letter or spirit of the antitrust laws. On the next slide is our collaboration and work product policy, and that states that committee meetings and presentations like today's are held for the primary purpose of advancements in our industry, which necessarily involves development of work product intended solely for the public domain. AIM's developed this policy for the protection of its members who engage in this important collaborative effort. And just a few more housekeeping notes. You will also notice that you are muted. You'll be muted throughout the webinar. If you have any questions for Julie, you can send those to me through the Q&A option, which is located at the bottom of your application screen. We will answer questions at the end of the webinar. Also, this webinar will be recorded and you will be emailed when it is available. Today, I'm here with Julie McGill, the Vice President of Supply Chain Strategy and Insights at FoodLogiQ. Julie will be discussing the impact of Section 204 today. Julie, take it away.
Thanks so much, Michael, and thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. As he said, I'm Julie McGill, and I'm the Vice President of Supply Chain Strategy and Insights here at FoodLogiQ. And as we move forward with this proposed regulation, companies are trying to figure out, how do we approach this? What's the impact going to be to my company? Do I carry items or do I make items that are going to fall under that food traceability list? And what's my role in this proposed rule? What are the things that I need to capture? What's the data that I'll need to share? So I'll take you through an overview of that in today's presentation. So I'll take you through an overview of the proposed rule. We'll talk about those roles. I'll explain the data. What are the attributes that they're asking that companies capture and maintain? And then some considerations and timelines, right? What things do you need to have in place and when do you need to be ready? So with that, let's step into an overview of FSMA Section 204. And this slide is a graphic that I pulled from the FDA's website. They've done a number of webinars and public meetings to talk about this, and they have great documentation on their website that speaks to the proposed rule. So when we look at traceability and really that case for, why are we doing this, right? We know that consumers want more information about the foods that they eat. And we also recognize that we're a global supply chain and that things are moving at a very accelerated pace. The approaches to, the regulatory things that we have in place do continue to evolve. And we even have some initiatives that are adjacent to the regulations, like the new era of smarter food safety. And then when we look at things, to date, we've got this whole idea of one up and one down. And really, when we look at entire supply chains and we look at some of the things that we've needed to do recently in tracing foods, we recognize that for some foods, the current approaches are not enough. So how will we do this? We recognize that there are needs for data standards and being able to link items, right? Connecting the dots for seeing that movement of products all across the supply chain. They also recognize that there is a need for interoperability and interconnectivity, right? We cannot do this alone, and we cannot just do this inside our own four walls, right? We need to be sharing information with one another across supply chains. And so being able to more rapidly identify those sources of contamination and really limit the scope of recalls is part of the vision here for these initiatives and for this regulation. So I want to talk about three key things that are part of this enhanced traceability record keeping, or FSMA 204. So the first piece is that enhanced traceability. So really laying the foundation for end-to-end food tracing. The second piece is that designated food list, and they're calling it the Food Traceability List. And I've got some slides on that for us today, but it's identifying those items that per their risk ranking model, they've deemed it necessary to require additional traceability record keeping. And then finally, taking a harmonized approach. And I really want to emphasize this, is that the work that's been done to date for the proposed rule took a look at all the work that industry's already done today. There have been some great initiatives in seafood and produce and proteins where they've taken a look at their industry and they've already put things in place like the Produce Traceability Initiative, like the Global Dialogue for Seafood Traceability. So they reviewed what was in place today and harmonized that as part of the proposed rule. So let's get into that food traceability list. So as I said, the FDA did develop a risk ranking model. It's very detailed, and it takes you through the criteria by which items are measured and could be put on this list. There are a variety of categories that are involved, and this involves everything from a number of soft cheeses. There's fresh cut fruits and vegetables, which is different than the list of produce items. And the list of produce items is quite extensive. We've got everything from leafy greens and fresh herbs to peppers and melons and tomatoes and cucumbers. There's a number of produce items on that list. There are some things like ready-to-eat deli salads. Many of these things contain items that are on the FTL, like peppers, for example, often are in some of these salads, but the salads themselves are on that list, and they've got that defined list. There are a number of seafood items on there, as well as shell eggs. And so when we look at what's on the list, the big thing I want to make sure that everyone understands is that it not only applies to the items that are on the food traceability list, but it also applies to foods that contain these items as ingredients. And so if it's used as an ingredient, then there's a determination of was there a kill step or not, and then that'll determine if you need to do that enhanced record keeping across the entire supply chain. So here's another graphic from some of the presentations that we've seen from the FDA, and really looking at that vision. I talked about roles. So every single circle that you see here is a role in the supply chain. And they're asking these partners to collect what we call key data elements. That's the information or the data about the event that's happening. And when we talk about those events, those are defined as critical tracking events, or CTEs. So they've identified points in the supply chain. There's many points where we touch the food, move the food, et cetera, but they've identified those events that are key for a certain time period, for a certain event or transaction in your supply chains. Which ones do we need to capture? Then from that point, this whole idea of gathering a standardized list of attributes that represent that event. So who was involved? What was the product? What was the quantity? The batch lot information and things like that. And so they have a glossary of terms. They have a list of attributes, and they have great documentation that takes you through what are those things that need to be identified. And for any company, when you're looking at this big picture and what's the impact to my company, you're going to want to take a look at that food traceability list and determine which items do we either produce or carry or purchase that are on that list. And then you want to take a look and say, okay, what is the data that I'm responsible for capturing as part of this enhanced traceability record keeping? And so having this information, like I said, traceability lot code is key. They also have something called a traceability lot code generator. They want to understand, how did you create those numbers? And so they've got definitions around these things, but having that information and having that same lot code and seeing it moving across the supply chain helps them to skip back to the source faster, right? If I can take a couple hops back, moving through the supply chain, then hopefully they can get to that source much quicker. And so, big picture with this proposed rule is really helping to clarify what are those traceability program records that companies will need to capture. And as I said, in your role, what is it that you're responsible for, and what will you need to capture? So I cannot stress enough how important these roles are in really understanding what has been defined and where you sit in that supply chain. The data attributes have been identified and the definitions have been shared in that glossary of terms. And then the events themselves really instruct as to when and where we need to capture this data. So if I walk through the graphic here on the right, and this is a very simple depiction, there could be additional partners across the supply chain, which would then possibly have additional event data that would need to be captured. Across the top, we see these program records, and there's data that you capture today about the production of that item. If you're the processor, what steps did you take? What batches may you have, put together to perhaps make a salad mix or something like that? And then if I'm in distribution, what are the steps? What's my role in the supply chain? And finally, whether it's a retailer or a food service operator at the end of the supply chain. So there are things that are specific to the role. You'll notice there are some steps on that farm, the growing events, data, and then there's things that are related to that first receiver so they understand when it was harvested, who's the originator of the product and things like that. But you'll also see some roles that move across the supply chain. So anytime something is shipped, you see that the farm ships things to the processor ships things to the distributor. They need to capture what's called a shipping event. And so those are defined here, and behind each of these bubbles, these colored bubbles down below, there are attributes tied to those events. You'll notice under the processor that they have an event that no one else has, which is a transformation event. And this is when they possibly are taking, for example, they might have different batches and lots, and they might have even different products. So if I have a salad mix, maybe I have, some lettuce and some tomatoes and some carrots, and I'm transforming them. I'm taking the original item and I'm mixing it with other products, putting it in a bag, and I'm creating a salad mix that's now going into retail. And we have to capture the information about that transformation event. You'll also notice the yellow receiving events, and that's when you're receiving product from another partner, capturing what did I receive, who did I get it from, when did I get it from them, what's the batch lot, etc. And you'll notice that at the end of the supply chain, that retailer role, they do have a role as well. They will be responsible for capturing that receiving event. And the way that the proposed rule is written today, it's not only about the capture of the data, but if you are part of an investigation, the FDA is asking that you would be able to provide that data to them within 24 hours. And so there is a component of this that companies need to consider that is related to the actual retrieval of the data, right? Being able to pull that out of systems and share it. So what are some of the benefits? Obviously, when we look at advancing traceability, right, we want to be in that mode of being proactive versus reactive, right? So we want to have fewer foodborne illnesses and deaths. We want to limit the scope of recalls, right? We recognize that that there are a number of items that are on that high-risk list that unfortunately we see multiple recalls year in and year out. We want to establish those linkages more quickly so that we can get to that root cause much quicker in these investigations. And really big picture, having greater transparency really allows us to leverage that supply chain intelligence. And there are many companies today that have traceability programs in place. And they're using that data not only for compliance with things like this regulation, but also that they are able to use that supply chain intelligence for other parts of their business, right? Whether I'm looking at freshness, whether I'm using it for inventory management, whether I'm doing FIFO versus FIFO, et cetera. There are lots of ways to leverage this. Once you're capturing it, then you can actually use the data within your supply chain. So I've talked a lot about roles. I'm going to hammer this home with this group and talk a little bit more in depth about the roles themselves. So you saw some of the graphics that talked through all the different roles, and really to just narrow in on it, there's kind of three big buckets. And I'd like to talk about this. The idea of, am I the originator or did I create the item, right? Is this something that I made? And so when we think about that, that's the beginning of the food chain, right? Whether it's a traditional farm and we're talking about agriculture, or maybe it's a seafood vessel, right? That I'm the fisherman and I'm out catching fish, or it could be a farm, right? That it's farm raised seafood. Then we've got things like manufacturing facilities. So when I talked about like those ready to eat deli salads, right? Those are something that I've got ingredients coming in, and when I process that item, I've now created something that is on the FTL. We have processors in our supply chains. And so even if it's something as simple as I receive whole head romaine or whole head iceberg, and I shred it and I put it in bags, right? I've turned it into a new product, and I can't turn it back, right? I can't make it into a whole head again. Those processors have to capture information about the products that they are creating. Then we get into the movement and the storage. So I talked about the shipping events and the receiving events, and many parties across the supply chain hold those roles, right? Whether I'm a supplier or a distributor, I'm a third-party warehouse, or maybe I'm a redistributor in the middle of the supply chain. If you are moving or storing these products, then you are part of this proposed regulation. Finally, we get to use and sell, right? So if I'm the user of products, if I am selling products, so this covers that wide range at the end of the chain, right? This could be grocers, this could be a traditional food service operator, like a traditional restaurant, but it could also be managed operators, right? If we're talking about, the food program at a university or the kitchens at a hospital. If you are receiving foods that are on that FTL and it's going to be provided to consumers, then you will need to capture this information. So looking at the roles kind of big picture, there are a couple key things that I want to talk about here. Is that, it touches the entire supply chain, right? I talked about all those different roles, and in that last graphic, right, seeing it from end to end on the supply chain. It does include both foreign and domestic entities. This is not just for processors that are in the United States. If you are bringing food into the United States, you are beholden to this proposed rule as well. As I said, that designated food list or the food traceability list, we know that there are certain foods that have been put on that list and that you will need to collect that information. There are some exemptions, and you're going to want to take a look at the product list as well as the process. I talked about something earlier called a kill step. So for example, peanut butter's on the list. But if you make peanut butter cookies, the peanut butter itself, you do need to track who did you get it from and what did you use in making those cookies. But once the cookies are shipped to that next partner in the supply chain, because they were baked, there was a kill step. And so the next partners, the distributor and the operator, or the distributor and the grocer, they probably do not need to do the extended record keeping. And this is where collaboration is so very important, right? Companies are going to need to work together. Suppliers need to communicate to their partners in the supply chain and let them know, are these items on that food traceability list? Do they, are they part of that rule? And then when we look at things like retail food establishments, there are some exemptions there as well. And you're going to want to take a look at the FDA's website. And like I said, determine what is my role? What am I responsible for? So looking at the roles a little bit different way, we had a real simple supply chain before, and I understand that supply chains are not necessarily linear, right? This turns into a spider web very quickly when we're in the real world. But if I break it down to some of those key roles once again, looking at the grower and the things that they are responsible for, you see a number of shipping events along the bottom of this supply chain, and then we've got some differentiation based on your role. If I'm the grower, what are the things that I need to capture? The on-farm cooler and the packer, they're really just moving things in and out, right? I'm not really changing the product. I'm not doing much, making any sort of transformation, but I am moving, I'm receiving product and I'm moving product. Then we get to that processor, as I talked about transformation before, right? They've got a number of steps that they need to capture. And then to the right, we've got the distributor who's taking things in and moving things out, and then on to the retailer. Another thing that I'd like to point out is that in many supply chains, these examples don't represent, for example, there's 6 circles here, but it might only be 3 companies. You might have company on the left-hand side here that the farm, the grower, the cooler, the packer, they're all under one umbrella. That's one company. And then we've got that processor. But when we go over to the right, if this is headed into a grocery store, many grocers own their distribution centers. So really, when we look at roles, There's 6 roles here, 6 different events that we need to capture, but there's only 3 partners in this example. So you want to make sure that you go through every step of this and make sure that you've mapped that out to understand where do we sit in this supply chain. So next, let's talk about the data. There is, like I said, there are in the proposed rule things that talk about what you need to capture, when you need to capture, and then how long do you need to hang on to that data. So let's get into that. So in the details today, as I said, if you manufacture, process, pack, or hold foods on that food traceability list, then you're going to have to maintain these records. The first piece is that the format can be in almost any format, that these records need to be maintained as either original paper records, electronic, or true copies, and that these records must be legible and stored to prevent deterioration or loss. How long do you need to store them? Right now, the proposed rule says that you need to store that information for 24 months. And if the FDA is doing an investigation, that you would produce the data within 24 hours. And they're asking for that today in a sortable spreadsheet. That's the format that they're asking for. So no matter how you captured and stored it on your end, when you are providing it to the FDA, that they're asking that it's within 24 hours and in that sortable spreadsheet. So when we talk about, what kind of data are we talking about here, right? I talked about batch lot. I talked about capturing that data at each step and how that could vary depending on the step. And then finally, there's the information that needs to be shared with trading partners, right? So everyone across the supply chain needs to know that batch lot information. So you might share that batch lot through things like an advanced ship notice or in a bill of lading and things like that, so that your partner who's receiving that product from you has that information. So when we get into the attributes themselves, I tried to break it into several different buckets of information because there's a lot. When you look at the examples, I think the document is over 30 pages. It's got a lot of information. But when we really kind of whittle it down, there's product data, there's information about the locations that are involved. There's the event itself, like what's happening. Is this a transformation event, a shipping event, et cetera? And then finally, that information from the farm, and we call that the first receiver data. So this whole idea of product data, the FDA did not prescribe that you have to use certain identifiers and things like that, but they do paint a picture of here's the information that we're going to need for each and every product that's involved in these investigations, and here's what you'll need to capture. So when we look at this looks very similar to things that we've done before. I talked about PTI, I talked about GDST, even the GDSN, right? That there's some key attributes that you would capture regarding any product. The same is true for locations, right? That there's an identifier, we've got the company name and the address. And if it's a farm, for example, they're asking for things like growing area coordinates. When we get to the event data, it's actually a very thin record because the location and the product data, that's foundational, right? I've got that information. In the event itself, it's when did it happen, who was involved, what were the quantities. Tell me a little bit about some additional records, like reference records. If you have invoices or BOLs and things like that, that can help us move a little bit quicker through these investigations. Who's your point of contact, et cetera. And then there are some attributes that are specific, for example, for seafood and agriculture, et cetera, that are part of this. And then, like I said, that first receiver, they've carved out some very specific attributes if it is something that is coming from the farm. So what does this all mean? When we're talking about this, looking at it from the standpoint of AIM, right? So they're looking at this and saying, you know what, for AIM, we, as Michael talked about, right? We're talking about things like automatic data capture and being able to leverage standards, whether you choose to use, say, a barcode like a GS1128, or if you choose to use something like RFID or data matrix, what information needs to be captured? How can I make sure that this is interoperable, that this does fit the needs that they've outlined in the proposed rule? So AIM did provide comments on the proposed rule, and there are 3 key things I wanted to talk about. The fact that for products that we would use some sort of standardized identifier, and they look to GS1 standards and recommend that folks use a global trade item number. The next is location data. And so identifying each of those locations across your supply chain by using something called a global location number that would uniquely identify the manufacturer, the distributor, the distribution center, et cetera, across that supply chain. And then finally, data carriers. As we talk about things like AIDC, there are lots of different ways that you can capture this information. I think the one thing that companies want to make sure you understand is that at the case level, batch lot is something that is absolutely necessary. And for most, case level is what we're talking about, the movement of the product. It could be pallet as well, and you can use standardized identifiers for those as well. We've even had some conversations with folks where they say, well, I break case, right? I don't deliver in whole case units. I only deliver in the sleeve or an inner pack, and understanding what format is delivered to that next partner in the chain, because you have to provide batch lot data. And if you're down to that sleeve or to that inner pack, how are you going to capture that information? So companies are going to have to consider this as they look across their supply chains. So when we talk about that automatic data capture, right, here's a great example over here on the right, this graphics from GS1 US, and it's in their current documentation for supply chain traceability. But it looks at that whole idea of identifying things, using those AIDC, using those data carriers to capture or scan or read those identifiers and capture that information across the supply chain. So let's talk about considerations and timelines, right? What do I need to do and when do I need to get ready? So I've touched on all of these items throughout this presentation, but you're going to want to take a look at your role and do that internal assessment. What are the products that are affected, and what things are we going to be responsible? Then you want to take a look at the who, right? Like, who owns this data in our organization? What systems do we capture that information in? And if we are going to affect operations, what are those effects going to be? Because you might be scanning barcodes today at point of delivery, for example. But if you are scanning, are you capturing that batch lot information at the time of delivery, right? That might be an extra step that you need to add to your operations. And finally, implementation. If there is something that needs to be implemented, whether it be you need to start marking your boxes with a GS1 128 barcode, or you need to start using handhelds at point of delivery or in your warehouse management operations. What are those things that need to be done, and when do you need to have those in place to ensure that you are ready for the proposed regulations? So when we get into the timelines for this, November of 2022, so November of next year, is when the rule must be finalized. And at this time, the FDA is reviewing they received like lots and lots, in the thousands of comments related to the proposal. So they're reviewing all of that, harmonizing that. They will come back with a proposed rule in Q4 of 2022. Then there's timing. There's like a 60-day period. And then from that point, which will be January 2023, 24 months for compliance for all parties. That's what's in the proposed rule today. So that takes us to January of 2025. And when companies take a look at this, depending on your role in the supply chain, there are some things that you can start preparing for now, right? What is my role? What are the items that are affected, et cetera? Then as you move forward with systems and things like that, right? That's why they have such a long runway, so that companies, if they do need to make changes to their operation on how do I capture this data, when do I capture it, where do I capture it, that you're able to prepare for that. The other thing that I'd like to point out, I heard this on one of their calls, is that, okay, so we're in January 2025, and let's say in March of 2025, that a new item is added to the food traceability list, right? It's considered high risk, the FDA adds it to the list. Anything new that gets added to the list, companies will have 12 months to be compliant and collect that data for those products. So I want to make sure that companies are clear that these timelines, you want to think of those different scenarios. So when you're looking at your organization, make sure that you're not only thinking about existing items, you want to think about new items too. Because if you, for example, if you're a restaurant there's an item that's on the food traceability list, and you add an LTO. So you've added a limited time offer. You've got this new burger, and let's say it has feta cheese on it. Well, feta cheese is already on the list. So if we're in that compliant, if it's, February of 2025, you need to be compliant immediately, right? You don't have a runway because that item's already on the list and the compliance dates have already come into play. So you're going to want to make sure that you not only understand the impact to your current existing operations, but also when you're introducing new items, when you're introducing new menu items or new products in your stores, that you understand what's the impact going to be to our organization and what do we need to capture. So finally, I want to talk about a couple of key takeaways. So the one thing I want to make sure here is that looking at, what do the standards enable and what do technologies enable here, right? So when we talked about standards and I talked about like the G10s and the GLINs and the using different kinds of data carriers, that's that identity, the digital identity of the products. And when we talk about using standards, that allows for interoperability between trading partners. So I don't have to do it 37 different ways, right? If everyone's using standards, we all speak the same language. As long as the systems and tools that I use, whether it be my scanners or my back-end systems, et cetera, if they can use standards, then I don't have to do anything special to make sure that it works with your systems. Then when we get into transparency and traceability, right, that whole idea, if I'm using those standards, then I have when I talked about connecting the dots, right, I have that information that I can connect. When we talk about technology, this is where enabling, right? This whole idea of speed to inventory and being able to identify and pinpoint those items in my supply chain, locate them and remove them from my supply chains very, very quickly and efficiently. We want to make sure, technologies can help companies minimize disruption, right? If I know what I have and where it is, then if there is a problem, I know where those things are and I know, that I can take action very quickly. And then accuracy, right? Like having complete and accurate data is key, just like it is for foundational information of the product itself. When we get into traceability data, accuracy is very, very important. Making sure that you understand, where these things are and really putting a focus on eliminating those time-consuming manual searches. So I recommend that everyone stay engaged. The FDA has excellent tools on their website. They've got lots of documentation. They have recordings from many of their meetings. So please subscribe to their updates and make sure that you're aware of their latest tools and the things that they are working on today. So finally, I'd like to wrap it up with just a couple key things. Really, when we look at the future, and as I've talked about the vision for this proposed regulation, as well as the response that AIM took in looking at this, we recognize that the future requires this whole idea of specified event data requirements, right? Narrowing it down to the things that are most important to capture across the supply chain. The next is having a common data language, right? If we use things like standards, then we will all be able to communicate with one another and we know what we're talking about, right? I don't need to create a cross-reference table to be able to distinguish that G10 or that GLIN. I know, from the information that's been shared about the products or locations or the event, what we're talking about. Globally unique identities. So those are those G10s and GLINs, right? So that I know that I'm talking about the warehouse that's in Omaha versus the warehouse that's in, say, Chicago. And then finally, having ecosystems of trust, right? That we're able to share information with one another. And really, like I said, there are some of the points in these supply chains where partners need to know the batch lot and some additional attributes so that they can do their step in the proposed rule, right? So that they have the data that they need to collect in their role in the supply chain. So with that, I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. And Michael, I don't know if we're going to open it up in the chat for questions?
Yeah, we will open up some questions now. That will be in the, you can use that in the Q&A dialog box. If you just click that at the bottom of your application screen, you can send those questions over to us. We do have some questions now, Julie, if you are ready for those.
Sure.
All right, great. So the first one is when is the traceability lot code required to be generated? Would a grower be required to generate the initial traceability lot ID?
So it depends. I will say that is one of those, it depends. So I would recommend that folks take a look very specifically at, they have very specific critical tracking event examples, but they also, and I've used this tool, they have an area on their website where you can submit questions. And then from that, the teams at the FDA will get back to you. So I would, if you have an, an example that is just specific to your organization, sometimes it just depends on the format, right? Like if you're harvesting lettuce in the field and you are field packing it, you would assign the batch lot at that time. But you might also be bulk picking, and these things are going to a processor where they're going to be shredded and put into bags, right? So you're going to want to make sure that you're very clear in like, here's what we do, and we have a question as to would we be the one to assign that batch lot code?
Okay, great. Just a clarification this one person wanted, and that was the expected role finalization date isn't until 2022, not 2021.
Right, not 2021. It is 2020. It is November. The consent decree says November of 2022. Yep.
Okay, great.
Right. So right now, as I said, there could be some things that change, right? They could change that proposal where it says, okay, you have to provide us with a sortable spreadsheet within 24 hours. They could change that to 48 hours, right? That could happen. Or they could expand the attributes, or they could shrink the attributes, right? Like those things could happen. But I think for where we're at right now, that companies right now have the opportunity to take a look at, what is the FDA asking for, and then what are those things that I can evaluate right now. I think the other thing that companies need to be cognizant of is that there are other drivers in the supply chain that are asking for the same data today, right? So when I talked about the Produce Traceability Initiative, the Global Dialogue for Seafood Traceability, they're almost a mirror to what's in this FDA proposal, right? That they ask for key data elements, that they ask for critical tracking event data, that they've got specific attributes they want you to capture at certain points across the supply chain. We also have drivers that are trading partners that have active traceability programs today, right? So there are a number of grocers and a number of food service operators that today are requiring GS1128. Some are requiring RFID, and they are asking their trading partners, they're asking their suppliers to mark their cases, to mark their pellets. They're asking their suppliers and distributors and other partners to capture event data. And they're asking them to share that data with them. And they share it through a variety of cloud-based, digital ledgers, distributed ledgers, blockchain, et cetera. So you might already have drivers in your supply chain that are asking for this data for certain items. You want to make sure as we move forward with this proposed rule that what would that look like if you had to do this data capture for all of your items that fall on that FTL, right? So, many of the partners that I just talked about, the grocers and the food service operators, many are asking, for example, in food service, they're asking for every single food product that walks into their restaurant that they have a GS1128 or, that their proteins have RFID, et cetera. So you want to weigh all of that if you're doing this evaluation, right? What does it mean to me? We've got this regulation, but I also have these other drivers.
Okay, great. Another question we have is, what do you mean with one step back, one step forward is not enough? So how far should we go on, say, a mock recall?
Right. So that whole idea of one up, one down. So you want to make sure you understand your role. So for example, like if you're a grocer, you're actually collecting, as I had that slide up, right, there were two roles. If you're a grocer and you own your distribution centers, You've got receiving events into your facilities, you have shipping events out of your facilities, and you have receiving events at your stores. So you're actually, it's not just the DC to the store, you also have to collect information for what's coming into your DCs, which you do some of that today. This is enhanced record keeping above and beyond what you do today for FSMA, right? There's some basic record keeping that's done. This whole idea of not only being able to connect the dots from point A to point B, we want to go all the way back, for example, to the farm or to the manufacturing facility, right? So I talked about peanut butter. In the examples that the FDA has given, the peanuts and the salt and the sugar, those aren't on the food traceability list. But I do have some record keeping that I have to capture for my the products that I get from them, the ingredients. But when I actually make the peanut butter, that now is an FTL. That's an item that's on the food traceability list, and I have to track that, and I have to capture certain attributes. And then my partners along the supply chain, I sell my jars of peanut butter. They go to the distributor, and then they go on to the grocery store. All those partners have to capture that enhanced record keeping for that peanut butter. So, like I said, there's some basic things that are in FSMA today. And this is for those designated items, enhanced traceability. So that's what I meant by like, for those items, what we're doing today was not enough. That's why this regulation is going into place.
Okay, and we had another question, and I'll just ask this one now because it kind of goes along with the peanut butter one.
Yep.
They said, for example, I've seen in stores chicken Cordon Bleu, which has the raw chicken, bacon, and cheese all in one product.
Yep.
So are all three ingredients typically individually traced? And what is the process for a product like this generally? And how often is it traced properly, in your opinion?
Right. So that's a great question too. So today, there are certain things, by category, there are certain things that need to be captured. I will say when we talk about the proposed rule and that you have to consider ingredients, that's where this collaboration with partners, making sure that you understand what's the nature of the product and has there been a kill step? Because in that chicken Cordon Bleu example, all the ingredients that you just listed, the cheese might be the only one that's on the FTL right now. Like if it has like, you said like chicken and it's got the breading and it might have cheese. And well, if it also had like say, chicken Cordon Bleu, I think has ham in it, right? But nonetheless, if there's one or two items that are on the food traceability list that are part of that the ingredients that go into that product, then the next question is, was there a kill step? Because sometimes things are par baked, right? And they just need to be reheated. Sometimes things are fully cooked and then they need to be reheated. So working, if you're a distributor or if you're at the end of the chain as a grocer or a food service operator, you're going to want to work with your suppliers to understand, are these items on the food traceability list, right? And that's going to be just like that question we had about who assigns the batch lot number. The originator of the products, there's probably going to be some questions, and that's where you're going to want to reach out to those teams at the FDA to understand, here's my scenario. Is this covered? There's some things that are going to be real easy, right? Like, I was talking about field, cut romaine that's put right in the boxes. We know that's, that's a leafy green that's on the food traceability list. But when I talk about something like a frozen pizza, might have some cheeses that are on the list. It's got, some fresh tomatoes, or maybe it's got some fresh basil if it's a margarita pizza, right? And fresh herbs are on the list. Then you're going to want to figure this out from the standpoint of, okay, well, the pizza was frozen. So, is that considered a kill step, right? So there's things that your food safety teams, your teams that work with regulatory, they're going to know some of what the lines are and what the criteria is and if your products fall under that. But then there's also sometimes there's just an open question. And so reach out to the FDA to get those answers. And they have larger teams that will, take a look at these things and get back to you and help answer those questions.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And this question kind of goes along with this too, just asking your opinion on how good is the communication between each parties in the food supply chain at this time, and what is the biggest obstacles you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of information that everybody's sharing today, right? I mean, you've got purchase orders and advanced ship notice and bills of lading and all these different pieces of information that you're already sharing today. So when we talked about those shipping and receiving events, you're capturing that today in one form or another. And that's when I talked about looking internally, what do we do today? And in those transactions, what data do I collect today? How does it align with the attributes that they're asking for, right? Those key data elements, right? What are the attributes that I need to capture for, say, that shipping event? And then in looking at that, okay, I'm collecting this today for, say, I'm a distributor. I'm collecting this today when I receive product. What do I then collect when I'm shipping product, right? So when we get down to breaking it all down, sometimes you might be, for example, you might be capturing the batch lot as things are coming in, but maybe you're not capturing the batch lot as things are going out of your facilities. So there's a gap that you're going to have to address. So companies are going to have to take a look at it. It's going to be a case by case basis for each and every company. I will say, I feel like companies do a very good job. Sometimes when we work with companies, they're surprised at how much data they're already capturing today. So a good example is if you're doing EDI, lots of companies use the 856, which is an advanced ship notice. That message has most of the attributes that you need for a shipping event. You may or may not be including, say, the batch lot information, or you may or may not be including, say, the traceability lot code generator. That's a new attribute for all of us. So there might be a handful of things that you're not capturing in that ASN, but the nice thing is you could say, okay, I want to leverage, here's where I capture that data. I need to add these 2 or 3 attributes to that message. Now, the next thing, of course, that you want to consider is when I do generate those ASNs, how long, where are they stored? How long do we hang on to them? Would I have access to that data, right? So in 20 months, right, let's say there's an investigation that was 20 months ago, you're supposed to hang on to this data for 24 months. So if I have to go back, how easily can I get to that data, right? Do I have a data warehouse, or can I go into my translator or somewhere and pull that information? And that's the crossroads of where some companies are going to choose to utilize those records and manage that internally. And some partners are going to say, I need to hire a third party. I want to get a solution provider in so that they can provide me not only with tools to capture that information and have it at my fingertips, but then you get into some of those other things that I talked about, right? The efficiencies and the inventory insights and things like that. Because when you're capturing this level of data, batch lot data for your products, you can leverage that within your operations for other parts of your business.
Thank you, Julie. Just a couple more questions here. You said data needs to be shown within 24 hours. And how easy is that to gather all that information if you have a strong traceability system?
So if you have a traceability system in place today, right, where you've got the product data, you have the location data, you have the event data, it literally could take seconds, right? You put in the criteria. If you've been asked for a certain date range, particular product, maybe you even have the batch lot number. If you have a way to query that and pull that information out of your systems, it can be done, just speaking for FoodLogiQ, it's like you could literally run that in seconds. You put in the criteria, it pops out a report. I think the part that folks are struggling with is this whole idea of that sortable spreadsheet. And the FDA was part of some pilot work that was done last fall, where they worked with stakeholders. So it was grocers, food service operators, growers, and they did these leafy greens pilot. They did a leafy greens pilot, and they used a sortable spreadsheet. It was before the FDA released the criteria for 204, but it was the exercise was very similar to what the FDA is asking for right now. So they did this, and there was some great feedback. And I can share that with you, Michael, and we could share that link with the team as the results of those leafy greens pilots. But there were some companies who struggled going through paper, right? Trying to find this information, going through their bills of lading, and trying to get all that information into the sortable spreadsheet so that they could share it, with the folks that were running the pilot. There were others who, that they were very well organized, the data was digitized, and they were able to get to that information very quickly. So I think that's a piece of it. And we, like, as companies are moving towards this, and even for companies who have traceability programs in place today, we always recommend do mock recalls, right? What does it take to find that needle in a haystack? And so you not only want to gather the data and build the systems, you also want to test it, right? Make sure that you're doing these with your partners and comparing, here's what you told me, and here's what I have, right? And so it's always good to do things, exercises like that to make sure that the system is working as expected.
Okay, great. And another question, if you have an antiquated system and plan on moving digital, can you describe the length of time for that process to install that?
Right. So, I mean, certainly it's going to depend on, how antiquated are we talking about, right? Like what's the current situation? But there are a number of solutions that are out there today that can take data in almost any format. You can key it in, you can, upload a spreadsheet, you can use your EDI transactions and things like that. So, big picture, many providers today have put solutions in place that'll meet you where you're at today, right? So if you're kind of low tech or no tech, they can help you, kind of bridge that gap. I think the other piece is if you are coming from that starting point, like I said, looking at your roles, determining what do we need to collect, and you're collecting something today. You are. What is it that you're collecting? Where is it? Who owns it? Right? How do you collect it, et cetera? And then looking ahead and saying, what makes sense, right? What makes sense for our organization? Because, there have been some innovative folks, for example, with our company, we had one operator that they used their inventory management system, and they were scanning inventory, in the back of their restaurants. And they said, hey, wait a minute, this is really, we could do this at receiving and capture a receiving event and send it to FoodLogiQ. And so we worked with them to build that bridge, right? You're already doing this step. You're already capturing this data. Let's take that data and send it to us so that we can capture that event. So I think sometimes companies are surprised at what's already in place. Another good example is often working with distributors and operators and grocers. They're surprised to find out, for example, how many of their produce vendors are compliant with the Produce Traceability Initiative, and they're already using PTI labels. Now the next step, of course, is, okay, well, if the labels are already on the boxes, if you start scanning those labels and capturing that data, right, you're changing your operations, but you're also getting that extended insight, right, into those products, and you have that batch lot information. So there's lots of ways to approach it depending on what your role is in the supply chain.
Great. I'm going to throw these two questions together because it's asking something pretty similar. And that's, do you believe the food traceability list will be frequently audited? And are there foods not listed that you think may become a part of the list eventually?
That's a great question. And I will say that even since we've started this journey and they released the, first edition of the food traceability list, it's already changed. There were some leafy greens that were on that list that the industry pushed back and they said, you know what, these are not normally eaten raw. They're usually cooked. And so there are already items that have come off the list. And then I've heard, like I said, if you listen to the recordings, people have asked very specific questions of, how often will things get added, et cetera. and the FDA has indicated that yes, there could be items that get added, and it's just based on that risk ranking model, right? So if there are significant outbreaks, if there are, issues happening within a particular category, they're going to take a look at that, right? And they're going to measure it against that risk ranking model and then determine if those items need to be added to the list.
Okay, great. And we will end on this question. It's basically the food supply chain is a mix of paper and digital records right now, and even large companies receive paper records from suppliers. Without a completely digitized supply chain, how do you envision standards aiding in traceability, assuming that those receiving paper can curate and digitize what they are getting on paper from certain suppliers?
Yeah, and that's a great question too. And oftentimes I ask companies, because we've dealt with this since the beginning of time, right? So I always ask companies, how do you deal with those companies today, right? The same thing happened when folks were implementing GDSN. They were like, I have partners, trading partners that, they're never going to join a data pool. They're never going to, put their data in there. And my question is, what's your workaround for those customers today? And I think the same thing's going to be true here, right? Is that you're going to have partners who are ready today to be compliant with the proposed rule. You're going to have some that need education and they're going to get there. And then there's going to be some that they might fall under the exemption, and they could. But if they don't fall under the exemption and they're still, whether it's paper-based or they're not marking, et cetera, then you're going to have to work with those parties to figure out how are we going to manage these items? Because it's not just point to point. Like if it's the supplier to the distributor and they're sending you pallets of product, well, you can probably collect the batch lot at the pallet level. But now when you get to the box level, you might not, you might have ballpark accuracy, but you don't have pinpoint accuracy. And then when you get to the restaurant, how, is this going to be a manual data capture, right? What's that going to look like? And so I think that there's always going to be a handful, there's going to be those folks that fall under the exception. And it's going to have to be a collaborative effort, right? How do I convert the paper to digital? And there are ways to do that, right? There are solutions that can help you do that. And then from that, how do I make sure the next partner in the supply chain also has that data, right? That they know what's walked into their doors as well. So it is, I think folks are going to have to get creative on that one, but there are ways, like, in our platform, for example, we have a UI. People can key the data in if they have to. It's not, it's not the most, obviously there's efficiencies if you're doing some sort of electronic upload, but if you have to key it in, yeah, we've got screens where you can key the data in. So I would also say that's something to consider is, how can you get that data from those partners, and maybe you have to load it on their behalf, right? To amend your records so that you have what you need. So yeah, so I'll leave it at that. I think when we get to the final when the proposal is finalized, that some of these questions, these great questions that this group has asked, some of those hopefully will be addressed, right? That the FDA is going to have harmonized some of these comments and questions in their final proposal.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Julie, for your time and knowledge today. It's greatly appreciated.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And this will be posted on the AIM website, is that right?
Yeah, we will have a link to our YouTube page, which will have this posted.
Great.
All right, and thanks to our audience for their active participation today. Just want to thank everyone for their time, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.